Why would someone choose the carnivore diet? I can tell you why I chose it. Hey, what's shaking bacon? My name is Bruno Panucci. I hope you're doing well. So in today's video, I'm going to discuss why someone would eat on a carnivore diet. I mean, there's lots of different ways to eat. Lots of people find what they feel works for them. I've talked to people in all groups, including carnivore, where carnivore just doesn't work for them. And they've tried lots of different ways, and maybe they haven't tried enough ways, who knows? But they found it just wasn't for them. Maybe it's because they went through meat aversions. Maybe it's because they just don't like meat that much. Or maybe because they just found it difficult eating a carnivore diet in that lifestyle. And they found they did better with other ways of eating. Look at Paul Saladino. He did carnivore and he switched over to a hyper carnivore diet, which has nothing to do with carnivore, but it's in the title anyway. But regardless, I'll talk about my experience and how I landed on the carnivore diet over 3.5 years ago and how my health has improved in so many ways. Well, you'd have to check out one of my videos just a couple videos ago talking about my health history. So if you just click off this video and go to one of those videos just about 2 or 3 videos ago, you'll see that and how many health issues have been corrected on a carnivore diet. Now, I still have heart disease. That's one of the reasons why I started eating on a carnivore diet and going low carb to begin with. But let's start at the beginning. So when I was a kid, I was an average sized kid. Up until I was about 10 or 11 years old, I'd say about 11, I started putting on weight. Now, my personal theory as to why I started putting on weight, and this might sound a little bit out there, but this is what happened. I never realized this up until maybe about 5 years ago or so. I had a flu really bad when I was 10. I went to the doctor's office and my doctor, the jackass that he was, gave me a flu shot while I had the flu. And I was borderline ready to go to the hospital. Like, I was really dehydrated. I hadn't eaten in almost a week. I hadn't really been able to keep any water down. And the idiot gave me a flu shot. Ever since then, looking back, ever since then, I started putting on weight. And I don't mean, I put on 20 pounds that year. No, from the time I was 11 to the time I was 16, I was well over 400 pounds. Well over 400 pounds. Scales stopped at 315. So I can only go by the size of the clothes that I was wearing. And back then I was wearing something like a size 58 in suits. So for shoulders, like just for the shoulders, it was a 58. So I was 16 years old. So I started weight training and I lost almost all my weight. And I wasn't weight training to lose weight. I didn't change my diet at all, but I lost, I don't know exactly how much I lost, but I'm sure I lost well over 200 pounds. I went down to 204 pounds was my lowest, and I became really athletic. So all of a sudden I went from this fat 16-year-old kid to this kind of looked like a power lifter. I was just a solid 16-year-old kid because lots of that jelly fat turned into just a solid fat around a muscular body frame. And then I just went and just leaned right out. I just continued to lean and lean and lean out. I lost 10 pounds a month, every single month religiously. And I did a circuit training routine. But I still had the diet of a teenager. I would eat an entire extra large pizza. I would have an entire family pack of cereal in the morning. And I'm talking big packs like Cheerios or Fruit Loops, like the bigger boxes. So I went through a lot of food, losing all that weight. I was not paying attention to my diet, but a lot of my food was home cooked, but I was still having large amounts of food. I was hungry all the time and I was eating like a machine, like it was my job. And a lot of it was unhealthy food as well, right? So, I mean, I would have 3 or 4 peanut butter sandwiches at a time, and I would cake that peanut butter on really thick. So I just loved it. So by the time I was 19, I developed hypothyroidism. And that was at least when I was diagnosed. I was actually about 20. And I was exhausted all the time and I put on 40 pounds for no reason. I couldn't figure it out. Someone said, hey, I think you have hypothyroidism. So to try and manage my messed up energy on hypothyroidism, this was the first time I ever tried any dieting. I was 20 years old, almost 21 by the time I started doing a macrobiotic diet. And that's something you can look into. And I did that to manage my energy and it was helping a little bit, but I still had really bad energy throughout the day. And it didn't help that I was working a lot, but nonetheless, that was the first time I ever tried experimenting with any sort of diet. And by this point, I'd already put on 60 pounds. So I was in the mid 260s and I leveled off there for a few years. And then I went up to the high 290s. And Before that, anytime I wanted to lose weight, I could easily lose 15, 20, 30 pounds just by cleaning up my diet, cutting out junk food and just eating clean. And within a couple of weeks, I would be down a couple inches, and that would, I'm sure, be bloating. And by the time I was 23, I was 295 pounds, and I decided I wanted to lose some weight. So I went on one of those soup diets, and it was one of those high vegetable, extremely low carb diets. I didn't know what all those things were at the time, as far as the carbohydrates and proteins and fats and everything. I knew virtually nothing about nutrition. And so I lost about 45 pounds. I was jogging with some friends of mine. I wasn't weight training at the time. I would usually cycle between jogging, weight training, and martial arts. And I would always go in those cycles. I was rarely doing any two of the three at once. But I was a pretty active guy back then. Even when I was a teenager and I ballooned up, I was an active guy. I played at recess with all my friends. I just really ballooned up. So there I was in my early 20s. I was down to about 250 pounds, and I looked pretty good. I was a big guy, but I still looked pretty good, especially when I was standing, because I would kind of hide my tummy. When I was standing, my tummy would go away. When I'd sit down, my tummy would come out. That's just how it works when you're a big guy. And so when I was in college, I ballooned up 50 pounds. It was all the sitting in the day mixed with a bad diet, as well as just not being very active. So I was, massage therapy was a pretty intense course. It was a 2-year course, and it was probably about 70% sciences. And I didn't have a science background. So it was at least 70% sciences, really. So it was a lot of commuting and a lot of sitting in school. And then it was just, boom, 50 pounds later. And then I got a night job after college. Here I was 100 pounds heavier than I was when I started college. When I started watching my weight, I could go down to about 315 or 320, and I'd hover, kind of like I've been doing the last little while. I find with weight, you get plateaus going up and down with weight loss and weight gain. I was trying lots of different ways of eating, and I went to Weight Watchers at one point, and I could manage that okay. Back then they did a lot of calorie restrictions. It was all about calories in, calories out, and you do so much exercise to earn more points so you can eat. So they called it points, but it was all based around calories. They just simplified it. It didn't really work well for me. I could do it for a few months, but then I'd go off of it. Then I try it again and I go off of it, back and forth. Then I started probably the best thing I think is good for anyone who doesn't have a carbohydrate addiction and you can tolerate carbohydrates. I highly recommend The Body for Life by Bill Phillips. There's some books out there, and it's basically just a bodybuilder's diet. It's portioned out proteins, fats, and carbs all through the day. It's actually a little bit on the lower fat side. It's a good book. You should really look into it if you're not consistent with carnivore. And like I said, if you find carnivore is not working for you and you want to try something else. Now, the problem with this was the beginning of me learning about my carbohydrate and sugar addiction, because I was allowed to eat anything I wanted once a week, as much of it, and I could outdo whatever my clean diet was 6 days of the week with one really bad day, because I had a really big appetite and a real bad sweet tooth. So I noticed a few years before, when I was in college, I had a chocolate brownie. It was after an exam, and I remember eating it. And some of you might have heard this story before. I remember eating it after an exam, and I acted just like a smoker who had a cigarette after a really stressful moment or day. And I had that brownie, and I just went, oh, and I just calmed down after I had that brownie. And that's when I realized, holy geez, that's what smokers do. And I realized there was something off there. It was a poor relationship with food. I was eating emotionally, and I didn't realize the depth of what type of addiction that I had to sugar. But that was the first time I noticed something, and I was about 25. By the time I was doing Body for Life, I was in my early mid-30s. But the problem with the even Body for Life for me was the carbohydrates. I still couldn't portion size the carbohydrates. And so I ended up stopping that way of eating, because I tried it lots of times, went on and off of it. Out of all the ways of eating, it's the most balanced way to eat of proteins, carbs, and fats. Pretty balanced for the average person. It's fine. If you need to up your health or your diet, going low carb and going with higher fat tends to work for people. You can't cut down your carbohydrates. This is what I learned through the years. You can't cut down or out your carbohydrates without replacing those fuels with fats. So nonetheless, I started seeing a doctor in 2013, and he was treating sugar and carbohydrate addiction. I never heard of anything like that. And he put me on a zero fat diet, zero fat and zero carb diet. I lost 30 pounds a month. In 5 months, I lost 150 pounds. The first month, it was kind of interesting. Everyone's reactions, some people would notice after losing 30 pounds, when you're 465 pounds, you lose 30 pounds, it's not really that noticeable. So I lost 30 pounds and some people would be like, hey, you're losing weight, right? And I'd be like, yeah, man. They'd be, oh, that's cool. And then the second month, then people are like, hey, you're looking good, you're losing weight. And I was like, yeah, thanks. And the third month, people are like, hey, wow, you're still looking good. Fourth month, people are like, wow, you're still looking great. The fifth month, I started to have people ask, are you okay? Now, keep in mind, I was down to 300 pounds. And people were starting to get seriously concerned because I lost so much weight so fast. Now, I had to stop that way of eating because I had a history of hemorrhoids, and that made it really, really bad. Between no fat and no carbohydrates, oh boy, my digestive system really suffered. And that's ultimately why I stopped eating that way. After the 5 months, I didn't like how fast I was losing the weight, so I doubled my protein. And I was doing okay with that. And I did that for a total year, from the beginning of the 5 months till 1 year later. 5 months were very strict. The other 5 months were strict as far as zero carb and zero fat went, but I opened up my calories a little bit. And I did pretty well, but after a year, I started basically going back to sugar and carbs. And before I knew it, it was out of control. So that's my history with most of those ways of eating. Now, after that, I had a major heart attack. So keep in mind, people, I was on a high plant-based diet. I was having tons of vegetable. I was doing exercise. When I was doing that zero carb way of eating without the fat, I had rabbit starvation though. I was incredibly cold all the time. I was getting by on 3 or 4 hours sleep a night, and I was exhausted through the day, but I couldn't take a nap. It was the craziest thing. So I did that way of eating all the way through the end of 2013 to the end of 2014. The end of 2015, had a major heart attack. By that point, I went up to over, I would say just over 400 pounds by that point. So I had put on quite a bit of weight. My cholesterol was still high on that high vegetable diet. It was all vegetables and it was very small amounts of protein, and most of it was turkey and chicken. So after I had my heart attack, I was continuing to try and do this zero carb way of eating, and I could never stick with it. I would do it for a couple weeks or a couple days or a couple months, and I was getting plagued with gout attacks. These gout attacks started getting really serious when I went on that zero carb way of eating the first time, because I found out weight loss can really impact gout. And eventually got to the point where I ended up getting kidney stones from my gout. So I was trying lots of different ways of eating, but I was starting to get nervous about weight loss, because every time I was getting weight loss, I'd get a gout attack. And when it turned into getting kidney stones, it changed my whole perspective. And I thought, you know what, like, geez, I don't know what the heck's going on. Every time I start losing weight, I get a gout attack, and now it's kidney stones, and kidney stones were dramatically worse than gout. So that's my history of different ways of eating. In that time frame, I also tried being a vegan for 3 months and a vegetarian for 3 months. Actually, I started off with a vegetarian and then became vegan afterwards. My energy dropped significantly though, and my testosterone was a thing of the past. It was a real big issue, and I went through a really serious depression, and I didn't realize what it was until I sort of hit a breaking point and realized. I'll get into that in another video. Now, I also was low carb when I was doing that vegan lifestyle, so I wasn't having starchy vegetables. I wasn't smart about it, in all fairness. I wasn't trying to get enough protein or carbs in there to help myself function ideally throughout the day. But nonetheless, the best thing I found, I always noticed, was when I was zero carb, my joints felt the best. I physically felt good, but I just couldn't figure out that exhaustion. So when I learned about the carnivore diet in 2018, I had a friend of mine who started it earlier, my friend Jimmy. And he said, you know, you just have to increase your fat. And I was like, really? And he said, that'll manage your digestive issues. You'll do just fine. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to try this. And I tried it. And that's when really my kidney stones started for the first time, because I was losing weight and that uric acid was getting filtered out and backed up in the kidneys. So those crystals were backing up. So it was tough to stick to a carnivore diet. Ultimately, I figured that problem out with berberine. I stuck with the carnivore diet, and it took a while though, because I was still dealing with sugar and carbohydrate addiction. So it took a few years of trying carnivore on and off, on and off, on and off, before I finally became consistent with it. And that's a whole other video I've talked about in the past about why I finally became consistent with carnivore and why I'm doing so good on it. Now, the problem is, even though most of my health problems have gone away, my heart disease was still an issue and it hasn't corrected yet. And I'm going in for bypass surgery in just a few days. But after that, I'm hoping between medications or stem cell therapy or what have you, maybe even just doing carnivore, I hopefully will reverse my plaquing in my arteries. Other carnivores have done that. Their calcium scoring tests have reversed. And I want you to keep that in mind if you're sitting there being skeptical about that. Look into it before you leave a rude comment. So why carnivore? Why did I settle on carnivore more than anything? Well, first and foremost, I have a sugar and carbohydrate addiction, and I recognized I just can't manage balancing the appropriate amount of carbohydrates, per meal, much less per day or week. I just can't do it. I can do it for little windows of time, but I can't do it in the long run. I always go back and binge. So I've had a history of binge eating disorder. I've had a history of sugar addiction and carbohydrate addiction in general. And I found that I manage food the best on a carnivore diet. I feel the best on a carnivore diet. I have all the benefits of great energy and great sleep most of the time, mixed with feeling good with my joints, and most of my health problems have completely gone into remission. Like, I'm talking over 90% of my health problems. The last few, I'm sure, will die down as I continue to lose weight. Yes, I still have a ways to go. Obviously, I'm a big guy. I know that more than anyone. You don't need to point it out in the video. Now, a bit of an analogy to help people understand. If you've moved around city to city, town to town, state to state, or province to province, or country to country, have you ever landed in a place where you're like, this is the best, I could live here, this works for me? It's different for everybody, but for me, this place works. And whether that be in Europe or Canada or just anywhere, a small town, big town, country, city, what works best for you is what works best for you. And for me, the carnivore diet has given me most of the benefits I need in my day-to-day life and health, and the energy and the stamina and the focus to function day-to-day really well. I have more energy now than I did in my 20s. It's definitely more stable energy throughout the day. I don't get tired spells throughout the day. I get tired at the end of the day, and then I go to sleep. Usually works as simple as that. If I am tired through the day, it's because I didn't get much sleep the night before. So for me, this is why I landed on the carnivore diet. You're gonna have your own reasons, but until you try it thoroughly and try it properly, you won't know if this is what's right for you. I happen to find what was right for me. Some people go their whole lives without finding what's right for them. I happen to find out in my mid-40s. I knew that lesson earlier. It was tough getting through my sugar and carbohydrate addiction though, but I finally got there. If you're struggling with consistency on a carnivore diet, and I mean being really consistent, I don't have a lick, taste, or bite of anything off a carnivore diet, then maybe you might need to reach out for help. Kelly Hogan, you can find her on Instagram and on YouTube, offers classes, coaching classes for zero carb eating and the carnivore diet. There's a difference between zero carb eating and the carnivore diet. You can learn more about that in my future videos or with Kelly. Anyway, thanks a lot. I hope this was informative to you to help you understand why I landed where I landed. This isn't me being stubborn or pig-headed about my way of eating. I don't try and stand on the top of a mountain or soapbox with a carnivore flag saying this is the best and everyone needs to do it. I think it's really good for people if they try it, just like I tried all those other things. I found what worked best for me after trying all those other things, and I landed here. It's a good place to be. Anyway, thanks a lot. Take care.